Hello, everybody.
Mm.
Welcome to the Motion Design Hotline. It's turkey time, I guess. I'm Evan Abrams, joined as usual by Kyle Hamrick. Kyle, how you doing today?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Looking forward to tasting these delightful techniques.
Yeah, it's a stuffed episode. We've got the sauce, as they say, and everything else is gravy. Anyway, here on the Motion Design Hotline, we take your motion design After Effects problems, and we try to solve them and turn them into content like this.
Also make lots of dumb jokes.
Yeah, I mean,
for which we do not apologize.
Yeah, we're mostly kind of a pun delivery service, so that's what we're up to around here. So if you have problems in After Effects, you can send them to us, and we'll make a show out of it. So there's a link in the description, in all the descriptions, whether you're on YouTube or Behance, link to the forum where you can send us your problems. Today's episode actually comes from that forum, if you can believe it or not.
A couple times over. Sometimes people send us questions and we hang on to it for a little bit and then kind of mix that up in a bowl with other similar questions.
Oh man, we've been doing this show so long, and Who points out that last year we also had a gravy-themed day. So
yeah, that happens.
Yeah, but you know, it comes around that time every year that we gather around and say what we're thankful for. And we're thankful for you and your various questions that sort of power this stuff.
True.
So yeah, you send us those on the forum. We get into it. But you can get at us on all kinds of spaces on the internet. So at EC Abrams, at Kylosaurus Rex, all over. So on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Busky, if you will. So if you want to find us on those places, you can and should.
And of course, anytime, even if it's the middle of the night, you can go to motiondesignhotline.com, a real website for real people. You can watch us. You could fall asleep to us every night for like 100 days if you wanted to.
That's true. There are well over 100. I think there might be well over 200 hours of this show currently in existence. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, you can also download project files over there so you can...
Yeah, more importantly,
keep the show. You can keep the good vibes rolling at home. So speaking of vibes, let's get into what we've got for you today. So this is collage style animation. Kyle, let's go to your screen real quick so we can talk about the inspiration for today's festivities.
Yeah. So a couple of the questions did specifically reference Ariel Costa, who is an artist that has been doing this style for quite a while. He goes by sort of his own little studio, I guess you'd call it, called BlinkMyBrain, which you can find at blinkmybrain.wtf. I will note in advance that portions of the site are rather not safe for work, so just be mindful. There is some adult language and some other weirdness on here, but that is definitely part of his thing. But we've gotten a lot of questions specifically about that, but also this, I think, largely because of Ariel Costa. This is a popular style, which is based on Dadaism and surrealism, as well as sort of rock and roll, punk rock aesthetic, collage aesthetic, a lot of things all mashed up. And I think one of his hallmarks is just kind of general craziness. But a thing that you're going to find a lot in here are these very exaggerated proportions. If I roll over these, it's harder to see them, but very exaggerated people. He does a lot of character work, but like you can see the arms in the middle here, wrapping all over the frame. This green guy on the left with these very stretched out body proportions. Those kinds of things you're going to see a lot in his work. And so we've kind of tried to lean into some of these techniques and capture a little bit of the essence here for our own examples.
Yeah, and I think his own work is sort of very kind of frame by frame. It's very sort of lo-fi traditional sometimes in what you will find. But we're going to try to cut some corners around here.
Yeah. We're trying to get the flavor. Maybe, these examples didn't take us weeks to build.
Yeah, this is the gravy that comes from the envelope is what we're getting into today.
Well, I don't know about that. I spent a couple days building mine, to be honest.
True, yeah.
So here's what I ended up putting together. This turkey person gobbling down slices of pie. And you can see here, I tried to lean very much into that collage aesthetic. There's a lot of intentional imperfections in here, which I think is another big component of this. And also just the fact that it's kind of weird and wacky. So that's what I've got.
Yeah, it's kind of a scary thing to observe.
Yeah, a little bit unsettling.
Yeah, and speaking of unsettling, let's go over to Evan's screen real quick. And I went ahead and made the classic handicraft of hand turkey. So that is a thing that all children in America and Canada are forced to do, to paint their hands and smash it on a paper and imagine that this is what they'll be eating in the next 12 hours. So I tried to lean into the kind of proportionality that this is not the proportions of my human hand. This is the proportions of my human hand. This is what Evan's human hand looks like. I keep saying human hand just so that it's very clear that I am a
that we
human.
are both humans.
Yeah, and
why do you ask?
Yeah, love to experience life as human. But in this case, you can see the fingers much larger, the palm much smaller, the thumb really getting tiny, more turkey-like in its proportion with this. I mean, getting into the black and white, you can really see the Sasquatchitude of my sort of arm hair here.
I mean, you live in the great northern wastes, so you need that for warmth, right?
It's true. Life beyond the wall is harsh, and the other wildlings huddle together for warmth. So here is sort of where I'm driving at with this. So I'll get into a bunch of deformations inside of After Effects, but the traditional way is to start over there in Andrew's turkey man hand. That's right. Yeah. She had turkey hands, George. Seinfeld. Apparently, the popular character Jack Reacher is said to have hands the size of turkeys or roast chickens, which is an insane way to describe any character. Kyle, let's go to your screen.
I guess I should have done turkey mitts then instead of a turkey head.
Well, I mean, that'd be unintentionally stepping on Jack Reacher's toes, and unless Amazon is going to give us some money, I don't think we need to be promoting that show.
And I guess I'm sort of, I mean, I would say unintentionally, but this is buried back in my brain, sort of unintentionally referencing Friends with this. So the other popular sitcom.
And the good people across the pond will know this is a Mr. Bean bit. So Friends, of course, cribbing from the Beanster.
Yeah, as one does.
Exactly.
I do see one question in the chat over here from Sunil. Are there any mixed media animation groups or forums? I don't necessarily know of any specific ones.
No. But
I think. Go ahead.
You're asking that on Behance. Behance is actually a good place. You can see a lot of great examples of this stuff on there. So some of it is very, very well keyworded. There's a lot of like tags on projects. So if you're able to kind of sort that out, you sort of start from one and bounce to others. And, you know, it is a style that you'll see quite a lot over there. So I don't know if there's a specific... I don't know.
Group just for that, right?
No, but then the other thing though is a very popular thing. Like Nike commercials are cribbing this style. If you check out what Stash Magazine is putting out, you're going to see a lot of this because it's very in vogue at the moment.
All right. So one of the things that is, I mean, I guess maybe I'll call it out here. One of the things you're going to see a lot in this type of work is the use of texture, and at least in Ariel Costa's work, he uses a lot of like pretty rough textures, but I'll just call this out again here. You can see like kind of the conveyor belt here. That's just a very simply animated texture, but it really creates that sense of movement. And then I don't know how well it's showing up on the stream, but the suit has a lot of looping texture on it as well. And of course the background does too. So I just wanted to call out, of course you can download textures from all kinds of places, but good old Adobe Fresco is a really great place to create exactly what you need. And you can do this on your iPad, but Fresco has a desktop version too. So in this case, I just came into my pixel brushes, into the rakes, and grabbed a rake brush, and then just kind of made some stuff like this. And as we've kind of been saying, the imperfection is kind of the point. So like, don't be too precious with it. Just kind of have fun. maybe make a couple different layers with a few different looks. And you know, right here, you could just make another layer, turn this one off, and then like try another one where you're a little looser, or you make the rake a little bit bigger, kind of go over that. You can layer these up, whatever you want to do. But this is a really easy place to make your own textures like this, and you can make them exactly what you need them to be. So I really encourage you to do so.
Yeah, and like you might be looking at photos and be like, I wish this was like heavier in this part of the image, whatever. You know, right here, this is how you this is how you do it. I don't think enough people really appreciate how much like process stuff sometimes goes into the works that out there that look really good. Like, oh wow, this person drew and scanned and then threw out like 30 different paint variations to get this. Like, yeah, well, that's kind of how it goes sometimes.
Yep. And I very much like this particular thing, way too heavy, but look at these beautiful edges that you can get just by like doing this. And so you can just, get in here and play around a little bit. I do have a tablet connected, so that's a big component of being successful here. This is hard to do with your mouse and get this kind of nice flow, but just look at those edges and how like sort of gloriously cruddy they are. So get in here and make some of your own textures, and you will be really happy about it. I would really recommend for something like this, just make like 5 or 6 different layers of stuff. You can package it up all into one file. And then these can just open up right in Photoshop if you need to rename them or cut stuff up a little bit or whatever. So with that, I will go ahead and hop over to Photoshop. I'm not going to mess with these textures. I made my own, but I just wanted to kind of show you. So let's get over here into some of the prep that I was doing. One thing I really want to point out about, again, Ariel Costa's work specifically, but all of the similar styles, a lot of whom have been kind of emulating him. We really talked about these goofy proportions that he does, and I want to call something out. There is a great Watch Me Work video he did a couple years ago for Motionographer. You can just search Motionographer Ariel Costa, and you will find this. It's about 2 hours long and silent, so you can just watch it. You can, speed it up. But you can see the way his brain works. Right at the beginning, he downloads this stock photo of this guy. And then in about 5 minutes in Photoshop, he cuts it out using the polygonal lasso tool, which you're going to see me do in a second, and then does a lot of liquefy and then kind of cutting again, and then cuts pieces off and reshapes them and like cuts off the ear and scales it up. And so in about 5 minutes, he goes from this to this. And it just gives you a little glimpse into his brain and just how stylized that stuff becomes, because he takes the time to, mush this stuff around until it looks appropriately weird.
And it's really not taking things for what they are, but taking them for what they will become. I think that's a level of kind of vision to have. People who remix stuff, like I have friends who remix like a lot of music. They do a lot of digital music, and they'll hear something like, "Oh, that's a good sound." I'm like, what are you listening to? I don't understand.
Yeah.
That's a Tamagotchi breaking down. Like, that's nothing. Like, no, that's
but if you take it and you slow it down and you reverse it, like now it's this beautiful new thing.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the attitude that you want to kind of bring forward into this work.
Yeah. Of course, like in my case, I was looking for specific things. I will say that I have mixed feelings about using the generative AI for a lot of things. But for something like this, when you need a specific thing and you are kind of particular about the angles and stuff, using generative AI to create something like the torso bit that you need, and then you're going to manipulate the heck out of it. That's actually what I ended up doing to get this. Here we go. This guy right here, who does not exist, but now he sort of does. And so I trimmed him out and turned him into what I needed, and clipped and did the same thing here, where he's all clipped out and manipulated, liquefied, turned into exactly what I need.
Right. So the unreality of the images that are hallucinated for us
kind of works in your favor here. Yeah. So let me quickly just show you. A big thing here is that when you're cutting stuff out, you don't want to be too particular about it. The polygonal lasso tool is going to be your friend. I'm not even going to worry about the thumb right there. You can just be kind of as, chunky. You're kind of emulating cutting stuff out with scissors here. And then maybe that's good. That's the end of the thing, right? You noticed in my example, the person doesn't even have arms to connect the thing to the body. So there we go. It's cut out. And one thing I really embraced with this is just being destructive too. I'm just going to go ahead and boop, apply that. No going back. Here we are. And then a lot of grabbing this thing and here's a decent fist, right? Let's maybe make a copy just for comparison here. Here we go. And then a lot of grabbing your free transform tool, maybe distort this thing. And now you can start, turning this into whatever kind of weirdness you want right here and create those extreme proportions right here in Photoshop and just get weird with it. Look, there we go. Look, I can really make it look like it's punching us in the face here. Just kind of go crazy with the stuff. You can hang on to the originals, but I felt like really embracing this kind of, I don't know, for me, a little more chaotic workflow really helped contribute to the final piece. Yes, let me grab that link real quick.
Yeah, I was just trying to Google up. Andrew was asking, can we link to the Watch Me Work thing? I was like,
I will post that link in both in just a second. If you want to go ahead, so Evan took a slightly different approach and did all of this stuff directly in After Effects.
Yeah.
So if you want to take over, because I did a lot of this kind of same thing in Photoshop. You know what? Let me show one thing before I toss it to you. So one of the other things I did was I did use some 3D objects. This is a GLB brought directly into After Effects. And then I did this so that I could kind of find exactly the angle that I wanted here. And then I made a couple versions of that and exported that, took it over to Photoshop and chopped it up into a bunch of different pieces. So kind of took that same, created the flexibility I needed here and then baked it down and distorted the size of the drumsticks and cut the wings out and stuff so I could get all that. So we'll revisit those pieces in a little bit when we talk about my animation workflow.
Speaking of pieces, I decided I'm going to just do it all in After Effects. I'm going to be wild. I'm going to come into After Effects and do it there. And particularly because I thought, well, maybe keyframing the deformations might be part of what I need from this. So that's why I just went ahead and I start with a picture of my hand. So clunk, here's my, oh boy, this mouse pad really collects a lot of dust and stuff. It's pretty gross in here. I gotta stop eating things in this office. So these are Evan's crumbs all the way around, and here's hair from my dog, and that's pretty gross. But anyway, here's my gross hand, and I really need to trim my nails. But anyway, let's start with that. And really, all I did was I took that, drag it into a new composition, and what can be really helpful is if we just start with, have a look at our little bounding box, get it into roughly the kind of alignment that you're going to want from this sort of asset. And as we cut this out, it can be helpful to just make something that is of the correct kind of scale and proportion of the thing that we want. So go ahead and let's change those composition settings. You can do it live so that you can enjoy it kind of shrinking as you dial it in. And the reason that we want to be just a little bit close to the image as we are kind of manipulating it is that all those wasted pixels are not helping us do anything. So we'll just go ahead and make it like that. So there we go. This will be our isolated thing. And I thought, okay, I want to chop this out. And so Kyle was mentioning using the polygon brush. I have a kind of a similar vibe that I do. I just start clicking around with my pen and trying to hit the highs and lows, and I'm trying to do this with as few kind of points as possible.
Chunky is good here.
Yeah. I don't really care how bad it is at this point. And part of working this way is the idea that you can quit early and it's still a thing. So by that I mean, if I were to kind of bail on this thing now, it's kind of bad, but it's also almost acceptable. So if we grab the mask here, we just go ahead and make this a nice bright pink, and that'll make it easier for us to see. The other thing I like to do is just change it to none. And if you go through and you think, Evan, this is not good enough, then just go ahead and add some more points. And I'm not freaking out with Bezier curves or anything just yet, because I just want to make sure I have enough kind of control points. And if you decide, well, curves aren't really for me, then you are already away at the races. So you just want to make sure that you're not never do more work than you have to, if that makes sense. That's kind of you'll learn this as you kind of progress. And if you're kind of early in your career, you might think, man, I got to work hard all the time. It's like, actually, no, you want to avoid doing that, because you'll absolutely harm yourself by trying to be extra all the time.
And sometimes, do the rougher version, see it in context, and then you can come back and refine it.
Yeah. So from this, though, I ended up with isolated hand. And I want to say time to getting this done was pretty minimal. But when it comes to sort of refining your curves and stuff on this, one thing that can really help is you grab the whole path and then you hit up your convert vertex tool, give it a single click, and now everything is curved. And you can just grab these handles. This is where knowing your kind of handle manipulation hotkeys is really helpful. So this is for me, option is the one that is breaking the handles from each other. So I'm going to move them to where I want. Cool. And then I break, and then I waggle it the other way. So that gives us an isolated hand. Thumbs up, right? Or all the fingers up, whichever finger you want to put up. And then I apply a little treatment over top of it as an adjustment layer. So Evan, why adjustment layer and not other things? Well, I could be applying it directly to the thing, but if I build it up in layers, it's easier to just sort of remove them as I want, or if I end up making other versions and I try to make something with that, it's easier to version it and move or remove the things as needed. And the other bit of business is today I'm using the black and white effect, which people are not familiar. Black and white on first blush looks exactly like tint, but it allows us to individually manipulate the reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, and magentas, positive or negative. And it can just give you a sort of more nuanced way of adjusting your tint. So for example, if I tweak the reds, the human skin is very red, full of blood, so that's why that has a pretty high impact. But then here, if I bring the yellows and say like, well, I'm gonna bring the yellows up a little bit as well. Ooh, and like the blues and stuff and the magentas and all this, I'm gonna bring those like down. And you start to get a different play of contrast throughout this thing that you otherwise don't achieve with just tint. And then a little curves adjustment just to bring that forward. But yeah, something like this, it also allows you to have a bit of a grungier, nastier kind of look as you're able to bring things out. Like I look like a real working man when you see these hands. Any kind of working person is going to have grunged up hands like this. And you can see my coarse black hair. But anyway, this is the isolated thing. I'm happy with this general mask that I've got around it. So then I'm going to take that isolated hand, and now it's time to actually get to work in the size of thing that we are doing. So we're going to go ahead and just use something like social media square, bring the isolated hand out, and then it's time to carve this up even further. Now, the reason why we're turkey themed today is because we're going to use words like carved a lot, and that's really helpful to what we're doing. But we want to look at it and think what's going to move, what's not going to move. And I think for me, let's just start by chopping this part out. What do we call this? Kind of the palm zone.
Yeah.
Chop. That's good enough.
Palm zone.
You're in the palm zone. Little heart of palm for me. Yum, yum, yum. And maybe I want to like slice this like close to the knuckles sort of deal like this. And the thumb webbing over there and the
And of
wrist.
course, traditionally, you would want, if you're doing something like this where you're kind of building a little rig, you really want to be mindful about like leaving little rounded parts so that things overlap. But we're not worrying about that today. Like
Yeah.
these are going to be chunky, and that's part of the look.
Yeah, not today. And so I'm going to slice my thumb sort of like here. And because I did that original, we'll say good version of getting the mask done, these get to be a lot nastier. So that's the joy of doing it up in this kind of style. Now, maybe you want a little bit of overlap between these. And let's just show real quick, because I want to be cognizant of time, with how these things might even kind of cobble together. So maybe I'm moving their anchor points kind of down to where they're going to be rotating and changing from. And we're going to call this the web, because that's the webbing between your hand and thumb. This is the thumb. Like that. And so if you were to be rotating this, that's fine, but I'm going to be scaling it down. Let's go ahead and scale the webbing down a bit. So we want thumb parented to web, web parented to palm. And then maybe we start to scale this down a little bit. And if you get them in the right click, click, click order like this, that boop, we can get them going like that. We go from a pretty realistic thing to a pretty scaled down type of a deal here, as the thumb is now getting smaller and smaller. So that's not terrible, right? Things are working out. Should I continue, or do you want to jump in back to yours for some
you
animation?
go ahead for a little bit longer.
Okay,
I
cool.
think you're laying down some good stuff, which is very similar to the way I ended up animating and rigging. So
okay, perfect. So if, for example, I wanted to sort of animate this kind of moving, let's go ahead and give this a wrist as well. So another kind of a nice cheat on this that you can do is, I'm just grabbing the handles that are on one side of the divide versus the other and sliding them around. A little bit of a jagged overlap here. Okay, and this is going to be the wrist. So let's move that down to the very, very bottom. Now, I was resizing these things with scale, and that might be the way you want to go, but it also might not. So let's look at a way that we can resize this, or reshape it even, to a more different type of shape. I'm going to start by bringing sort of this parallelogram a little bit closer to the actual seams of the thing, a little bit like this. And this is too soft in its pinkedness. So now let's go nice and extreme. There we go. Now we can see it. And we're going to use something called the reshape. And we talk about this on the program a fair amount. Reshape is maybe a thing that you have not interfaced with, because it is kind of a weird bit of business. It's the way
real weird.
But reshape is going to take us from a source mask, in this case, mask 1, to a second mask. I'm going to duplicate it to get mask 2. Mask 1 and mask 2 currently are identical. So let's go ahead and make one green so that we can see that. And mask 2, I'm going to keyframe its path. And the destination mask is mask 2. Interesting, no change. Okay, let's bring the percentage up, and I'm going to grab mask 2 here, grab mask 2, and I want to make sure that I'm grabbing that, and we're just going to, there we go. So now I can really get a fix on its points. You can see how that's working out. That as I move mask 2 around, we're getting quite a distortion in what's happening with the thing. Now, making it larger, smaller, that's all well and good, but you can really freak this thing out. And we're really going point to point on it between the 2 points. We have how many correspondence points? Some, in this case, 1. And what we want to do is just add some more. So you hold down the Option, hit the old plus, and if you go corner to corner on this thing, and this is where things get complicated, is you have to hover over it and make sure that it turns into the right symbol so you can then drag it. What you want to do is essentially go corner to corner on this such that you can now add in a few little extra corners. I want to make sure I'm grabbing this. Things get fiddly at this point. Things are getting fiddly. There we go. And I'm going to change the elasticity to maybe normal, or maybe I go ahead and use like super stiff, or maybe I go with linear and such things. But the more of these control points that you add into the mix, the happier you're going to be. And with something like this, with a pair of parallelograms or something, then if you go corner to corner on it, it's got a much nicer deformation on it. And then as things get animated, you can simply keyframe the location of the points of this mask, and you can kind of move this around. One sort of caveat to be aware of with this is that this shape here, the correspondence points are going to shift because they're based on a percentage of things. So you might have to just put them back in the corners. You can keyframe that. You can keyframe your actual mask shape itself. And that's how I ended up getting a wrist here that kind of flows along with things. And it kind of seems to remain more or less attached. Because one thing that you can end up with, and the fingers here are an example of that, is that they're not attached in any way. They're just floating around. They're just scaled up and being weird. And same with this, but I could use the puppet pin as well to kind of shift and move its points around. So we have the ability to make things pretty good the way we want them. But also, if you bring, say, the density of the puppet mesh down, you get a much nicer, or not nicer, you actually get a nastier bend. But for our purposes, corrector. So my density is 0 on this.
Worsening.
Good worse, yeah. So I'm just going to jam that in here. I'm going to jam some more pins. And like, if this
look at how blocky that is.
Yeah. Right. So we are really blocking it up with this type of thing. But again, this is the puppet pin. It's using a triangular mesh, and you can kind of see the mesh. You can kind of see the mesh. You can kind of see the meth. No, you can see the mesh on this, and hopefully that's showing up. But you don't want a lot of triangles because we want it to feel janky and weird. And this is how we produce that. So anyway, animating jankiness, weirdness, hopefully these tools will get you there. But Kyle, you got some weirdness to lay on people as well.
I do.
All right.
So it looks like a couple folks were not familiar with reshape. So you just blew a couple minds with that.
Boom.
Good.
Now, reshape works best, I'll just say, on paths that are sort of identical in number of points and fairly similar in shape. So if you're going from, say, like a very rounded thing to a very squared thing, that could make some weirdness. But you gotta poke the thing around to try to get it how you want. And just remember, this style is not meant to be perfect and good. You're gonna have to experiment and try getting weird with it. So
you could certainly use reshape to make something. And I think the intent is that you could use it to sort of morph from one thing to another. And it has sort of a slider you could use to transition, between the A and the B form there.
Yeah. And it's very useful to, if you're thinking like, I'm going to go from this extreme angle to this extreme angle type of thing, of you're just going to change. You're going to go to this mask now. Now you're going to this mask now. Like that's another way of kind of making it work.
Now, I went a little simpler with my reshaping. There were some things. So you can see I've got this piece of pie here, which again, I cut out like pretty roughly. I'm a bit zoomed into it here, but you can see kind of these hard lines here. So just that same polygonal lasso tool. And then for some of these, I just went with good old corner pin here in After Effects so that I have a little more freedom to manipulate it in here. Now the corner pin effect can have kind of the same vibes here. Let me change this layer color so that you can see those boundaries a little bit better. So the corner pin tool just takes the actual 4 corners of the rectangle that is the bounding box for your thing. And then you can drag those around, or you can manipulate them with the numbers over here. And these are useful for anytime you need to sort of map one thing onto another thing, like a screen replacement. But in this case, you can use it to just like make something look weird. And you could, of course, animate these over time. But if you want your pie to just be a little more grotesque or odd, this is a good way to get there real fast. And then a lot of my stuff I ended up tri-toning just to get the colors in there. What's up?
Yeah. Oh, I was going to offer, so corner pin in the case of this pie, right? It's a triangle inside a rectangle.
Yeah.
Sometimes what you might do is you might start by taking the thing and making it rectangular or close to rectangular, and then bring that back in so that the corners are on the corners of the thing, if that kind of makes sense.
Exactly.
It's a bit of like going backwards, making it a weird deformed thing, and then putting it back close to normal. Something in that game of telephone makes things nice and
that's
weird.
A good point. Like in this case, we're both intentionally trying to make things look off.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to make them look correct, obviously you need to be taking more care. And one thing about corner pin, if I just totally reset this, these points all are sitting exactly at the corners. And so the rectangle around in which the thing exists, which you can manipulate by precomposing if you need to, that's a big part of sort of how successful you're going to be here. Because in most cases, like this is obviously not what you're going to want, but maybe it is what I want if I want it to look like a super weird piece of pie. So let me, let's see. You know what? I'm going to show you. So I just thought I'd show you my bad work here. I started off with the concept for this, and I just made a real crummy sketch using shape layers. And that's okay. I just wanted to point out, like, it's okay for this to be super bad. And then I just nested this on the bottom of my actual working composition. And as I put the real pieces in, you know, I just kind of covered this up. It's a sketch. It's just like I made it on a piece of paper, but I did it in here instead.
Right. And now you kind of know the proportions of things you might go out and acquire to do the thing.
Yep. Kind of helps me. I ended up not using arms for my version because I tried them and I thought they looked goofy. But this kind of gave me a ballpark layout. So let's go into maybe one of these other little bits here, because obviously this breaks down into several pieces. So you've got things like the hand, and just with a little bit of simple masking here. So we've got the hand here. I made another version of that that can sit on top just so that I can nest that fork in there, right? A lot of very simple kind of compositing tips in here. And again, you know, that hand is manipulated a little bit from Photoshop. And since you got this break here, if you wanted, you could make this, oops, I used 2 forks in here. You could, like, you know, totally manipulate this to make your fork super strange. You can make the top real big if you wanted to, and, you know, cut this up so that you're only seeing parts of it, again, with another mask. So you could have like a super non-proportional fork, whatever you want to do in here, right? But let's get into this, maybe the mouth and the head here. So here's our head. There's that turkey that you saw before. And like I said, I took a picture of this. I took it into Photoshop. I cut all the pieces apart so that you have all, you know, sort of the base and the legs. I did a little bit of cloning and cleanup work so that I had separate pieces, but not being too perfect with them. And then you'll see, boop, looks like a lot of keyframes, but it's really just sort of one set of keyframes duplicated and then duplicated again, very slightly different, and then over here, because this whole thing is a loop, kind of a 2-part loop. I did this to a music track, so you can see I had exactly 4 measures here. So this is a really great way, even if you're not using the music in the end piece, like I didn't here, this set a pace for me and gave me like reference points here, because now I have like this is my loop point for the animation exactly halfway through. And so I have sort of the A and the B, and then I can just loop those again. So this is a big part of the strategy here. So I can even just sort of cut that in half. So let's take a quick look at what the animation looks like on this turkey head. A lot of this is just posterized wiggles so that they look kind of low frame rate. And then I thought for some extra creepiness, the wings need to reach out when the pieces of pie are coming towards us, right? Yeah. Really adds, almost kind of looks like the Predator's little mouth claws.
Mandibles?
Yeah, mandibles, let's say. But, you know, once I put the mouth on top of this, I was like, oh, obviously those wings need to move. Just gotta lean into it, right?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is great because we're going from a 3D thing to a 2D thing. It's getting exaggerated and then it's getting animated. So I don't know. I think this looks great. Like this is a terrifying creature.
Yeah, yeah. And then of course we take it back into the main composition. I thought originally that I was going to end up sort of doing some head turns by using a few different angles, but it just felt unnecessary. It was a little distracting, I thought, so I killed that. So here we go. Then we dropped this mouth on here. Let's just solo that. So I did a trick. I needed to get this wing over the mouth. So I did a trick that I've shown quite a few times on this show. I opened up the Essential Graphics panel and I just dropped, I kept it simple here. I didn't really build a rig at all. I just grabbed the opacity controls of each of the visible layers, stuck them up here in the Essential Graphics panel. And this way I can use this same composition in some different ways, any place that's nested as a pre-composition, which this is. So to get just that wing in the essential properties, I just turn up the opacity on those two parts of it and turn down the opacity on everything else. And then the opposite on the other version of it. And so now you can use that to layer something else in between, but you don't have to be messing with two different pre-comps. Okay. So we've got our loop here. And so let's dive into that mouth. That's again a pretty simple little rig here, just using a little bit of simple puppet tool and simple position movements. So we're moving them apart like this. And then I did the same sort of puppet tool stuff that Evan showed. I just went with 3 points. You can see them here, 1, 2, 3. And that way you can kind of go, ah, when it opens up. Give this just a little bit of variety between the two loops and then make a black kind of chunky shape that can go behind that so that it, has a, I don't know, a place to go, right?
Yeah, a void.
And here you go.
It's got a void that it can absorb things into.
But look how rough and crappy that cutout is. And like this animation is like intentionally pretty sort of lo-fi here. It's all part of the vibe, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like I had debated on mine, like, oh, am I going to mess with the motion curves a lot? I'm like, no, stop. That's not how it bees.
I did do motion curves, but I'm heavily posterizing a lot of my stuff. So I'll show another trick that I've done a lot here. Let me just turn this off. So here's the head animation by itself. So you see that like internally, those things have some posterization on them, some low frame rate. I should call it like on the internal movements of the head. But so this is just a couple of rotation keyframes. But then I'm using this little expression to posterize time on the specific property. So I'm setting a frame rate for just this property. And in what I did in a lot of cases was I have a wiggle that I want at 1 frame rate, but then I don't want to necessarily be posterizing all the movement at such a low frame rate. So the wiggle is happening like this fast, but then the movement can happen a bit faster. It's hard to do both of those. So in this case, I'm wiggling at 3 times per second, but I want to be able to see the fidelity of movement at this at 8 frames per second.
Okay.
So rather than trying to make more complicated code in here, I'm posterizing the property and then saying, take whatever you got from that and then add this little angle control that I added from the effect expression controls. You can add an angle control or a point control or a slider, whatever you need to get there. And so that's a pretty easy way to kind of wiggle at one speed, but then move at a different speed, but kind of have good control over those.
Yeah. And like, to really get the vibe, it is discordant, discordant wiggling of stuff.
Now I will point out, and you could certainly mess with this. They all have a common denominator. So I'm working at 24. Most of these are posterized at 12. Some are posterized at 8. And then a lot of the wiggles are at 3, 2, or 1. But a lot of the different pieces are all at different frame rates like that. And it, again, yes, definitely like helps make it feel weirder.
That's right, people. You thought you would escape math class, but you haven't.
Yeah, no.
You're still in it, and we're still talking about factors even today. This is that's right. This is simple factoring, all of the numbers that could multiply. And if you're ever wondering, good people of the internet, you can just type in factors of 24 and it'll list them all. So don't worry about multiplication tables, etc. The internet has done away with the need for internalized knowledge.
Much to my dismay. So let's take a look at how I'm using some of those textures I talked about earlier. Here's the conveyor belt, which is just a pretty simple thing here. You can see I made the chunky shape. I may have even taken the shape I literally just drew from my blocking. It doesn't need to look great. It's just giving the idea here. And then one other shape, and look, now that's 3D, right? It has dimensionality. You can see that that's leading away from you. But this on its own, not very interesting. I do have some wiggles on here. It's actually using the wiggles are all on this as a thing in the other one. So what I wanted was this texture. So let me turn off some of that here. Boop. So I brought in that texture that you saw me draw earlier, or a very similar thing that I drew. And this is just using the offset effect, literally just doing that. You could probably do this with positions if you'd drawn it long enough, but I drew this one so it could kind of loop like back on itself like this. So offset is a good way to just make it loop forever, right? And then, of course, I wanted that to be a little chunky, so created an expression, posterized time 8, and then value. So take what you're doing, but just make it 8 frames per second. So chunk, 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 chunk. There we go. And then if I want to restrict that to that shape, I can just use track mats. If you don't see that, you can always right click here and find columns modes, which is where those live. Or you can come down to the very bottom, toggle switches and modes, and then you'll find your blending modes and track mats. Let's just open that up a little bit more here. And then a layer that you want to mat with another layer. I want to restrict this so it's only visible within that top lighter gray shape. So you can use this little drop-down menu, conveyor shape, or you can use the little pick whip and say, boop, right there. Only visible within that other thing. Now, by default, it's going to turn that other layer off. So I want to see it, so I'll just turn it back on. There we go.
Yeah, and this is like maybe your texture has color, or it's not see-through. You can set it to multiply or whatever as needed. And Sunil is asking in the chat how to create kind of looping texture. I went ahead and looked through and so this is one way of looping texture, but you can always just create a comp, and the same way we loop any comp, we use time remapping and then the loop out type of deal on that. So you've got some loopy text in.
Got some right here.
Boom, blam.
And yes, I know Tim a little bit, and he definitely has some very similar elements in a lot of the stuff he builds. So here is one of the things that one of the looping textures that I created for the background. I got a piece of paper here. A lot of these are just downloaded from Pexels, and then another piece of paper. And then that has some wiggles on position and scale here. Blah, 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 blah. I didn't worry about frame rate here, and I'll tell you why in a second. And then some of my gritty textures that I drew. There's one instance, another instance, another instance, another instance. And then all of these just have their own wiggles. And so they're kind of doing this. And in this case, I wasn't really looping this one. I just wanted a bunch of different frames. So the background of my thing is several different copies of that layered on top of each other with that same low frame rate wiggle. And so there's my looping texture by making one texture, bunch of different frames. And then if I kind of freeze frame slightly different versions of it, they're all a little bit different. And then you can loop them back on top of each other with some wiggles.
Yeah, and so when we talk about expressions on this thing a lot, but
because we're nerds.
Yeah, yeah. But some of your best friends for this type of thing are your loop in, loop out type of deals. You want to get comfortable with like the wiggle, number of times a second, and then largeness of wiggling. Random can be very helpful for you.
Yep.
So if these are things, check out the expression reference guide that can be very helpful for that, or just more episodes of this show, which talk about
we've gone into a lot more detail on these expressions before, and of course you can download these project files probably about 10 or 15 minutes after the show, and you can look at how each individual layer is done. In my project, you're going to see a lot of this posterized time. Just to call it out here, if I get rid of that, let's go ahead and just put that only on position. So the position is wiggling here. You're going to actually see, let me turn that way up to 80. So this is 3 times per second up to 80 pixels. So you're going to see it move a lot like that, okay? But if I want it to be choppy, then I could say posterize time and say maybe 2. I only want to see you update 2 times per second. Put a little semicolon to close that off. So whatever comes below you, only give it to me 2 times per second. And then I'm wiggling however much. And so now we get that kind of jumpy, stop motion-y look, which is a big part of what we were aiming for here.
Yeah, very staccato type of deal. Yep. So anyway, hopefully that gives you the loopy textures that you are hoping for.
One flavor of them at least. Yeah.
Yeah, and like by no means is this the only way to do it. Some people just import an image sequence and loop that.
Yep,
right? Like
exactly.
The old grit kit getting some.
Yeah, there's some great products out there that like Peter Quinn's grit kit that give you several things, and they maybe have a 6 to 10 frame sequence, and you can just run that at whatever speed. And each of those is a little different. Or go into Fresco and make 5 or 6 different frames of similar but slightly different textures, and then run those as an image sequence at whatever speed you like.
Indeed. Let's see. We got like 3 minutes left on the clock here. Probably not enough time to get into too many other things.
Not too much else. I think we could just chit chat for a minute here.
Okay, so in which case, one thing that I want to say to people is we want to see if you make anything out of this. That's what we desperately wish to see your works. So if you make collage style stuff, show us what you make. Show us what you did. Send it at us. I'm at EC Abrams on the internet. He's at Kylosaurus Rex all over the internet. So get it to us anywhere. We want to share what you make. We want to see what you make. If you do things based on what you learn on this show, we want to celebrate that.
It's great to see that our show matters.
That's true. Well, I mean, it matters to us because we like to hang out with each other. We like to hang out with you. And if you have problems, as you can see, we do discuss them and we hopefully solve them. To anyone who had this specific question about collage stuff, if we didn't hit the specific collage techniques that you were hoping for, let us know and be very specific about it. So those are the types of things that we want to get from y'all. But coming up from us in the future, I mean, there's more of this pretty much every Wednesday around here. So
not next week, because we are on a break for next week because of the holiday, but we'll be back in December.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Holidays do happen. I have already had our correctly timed Thanksgiving up here. So, of course, it's very confusing to me. People wonder why that is. It's because the harvest is different between America and Canada. We are further north. Therefore, we must harvest earlier and go into our igloos. So, like we say, we're coming back in December. We got a lot of lovely stuff going on there. I believe we've got some topics earmarked, but keep it locked here on Adobe Live for rich full days of lots of things to learn going on. And like I said, get at us on all the various social medias because we want to hear from you. We want to make sure that we're doing the stuff that you want to see. I don't know. Anything else to tell the people?
I don't think so. Have a great week, everybody. Make some cool stuff. Try to make something that matters to you or to other people.
You know what? That dovetails nicely into this kind of, let's say, final question. How do you generate motion design ideas? Some tips on generating ideas.
Oh, boy.
1, have problems, solve problems. That means if you have a problem, like there's a message you want to get out in the world, work that problem. You will find you are more motivated to produce stuff and you will make more things.
If you care about it. Yeah.
if there is purpose. Yeah. So drive towards that. Treat yourself like a client, treat your causes, treat those things, whatever, as a type of client project. Design thinking, that's how we get there. There's no mystical muse coming to touch you on the forehead. It's a lot of work.
And I might suggest checking out some of our previous episodes where we do everything on the fly. And so you can kind of see some of that thought process. It's a condensed version, but you can see some of that happening real time.
Yeah, and so that's sort of one of the biggest ideas is just, things. And the other thing to generate ideas, you don't do it in a vacuum. You have to absorb things, process it, and then make stuff. So, keep yourself feeding the engine. You got to put water in the well if you're going to take water out of the well. All right, that'll do it for us. Till next time, stay creative, be kind to each other, and we will see you all around the internet.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.